My name is Ranger Thomas Hale, and for more than 15 years I've walked the trails of the Mark Twain National Forest in southern Missouri. To most people, it's just a patch of green on a map, one of the largest expanses of woodland left in the Midwest. But to those who've spent their lives inside it, who know its moods and its silence, the forest is something else entirely. I didn't sign up for this job to chase myths. I wanted to protect hikers, enforce park rules, and help families enjoy the outdoors safely. That was the idea. But it didn't take long before I realized that being a ranger here meant carrying the weight of stories most people never get to hear. Stories whispered around fire stations and ranger cabins. Stories of people who entered the woods and never came back. We all hear the same explanations. They got lost, they underestimated the terrain, or nature simply took them. And yes, sometimes that's true, but not always. I've seen cases that don't fit the usual categories, situations that left even seasoned search and rescue teams shaking their heads. And I've learned that in Mark Twain, you don't always get the luxury of a clean answer. I used to think helping families find closure was the hardest part of this work. Telling a mother that her son wasn't coming back. Watching the light drain from a father's eyes when he realized the body we'd found was his daughter's. But the truth, the real truth, is heavier. Because sometimes I couldn't tell them what I had actually seen out there. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew they wouldn't believe me. This forest is old. Older than the roads that carve through it, older than the towns that cling to its edges. And with age comes memory. Some nights, when the fog settles low and the trees crowd in close, it feels like the whole forest is holding its breath. Like it remembers every step, every word, every scream. People ask me what it's like to be out there at night, miles from the nearest light or voice. I tell them it's quiet, but not in the way they expect. It's the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, where every crack of a branch feels deliberate, where even the smallest sound carries weight. And if you've ever stood in that silence long enough, you know, it starts to feel like something is standing just out of sight, waiting for you to move. I joined search teams. The night that changed me began like so many others. A call came in. A pair of hikers overdue by 2 days. Locals, both in their 20s, familiar enough with the trails that getting lost didn't seem likely. Families begged us to bring them back. We set out with dogs, radios, and the usual determination. But even then I felt it. The heaviness in the air. The way the woods seemed restless, like something unseen was moving alongside us. And here's what I need you to understand. We weren't the only ones searching that night. I don't mean other rangers or volunteers. I mean something else was out there, threading the same ground we were, tracking the same missing people. The dogs sensed it first. They balked at certain paths, growled at empty clearings, refused to follow trails that should have been easy. That was when I realized. What had taken those hikers hadn't just been chance, or missteps, or nature. There was something deliberate about it. Something intelligent. And for the first time in my career, I felt like prey instead of protector. What I saw later that night, that's the part families were never told. That's the part left out of the reports. But I'll tell it here, because the story isn't just about those who went missing. It's about what I found when I followed the trail deeper than I should have. And before we go further, let me pause here. If you're watching this, it means you care about the truth behind the headlines, the stories that don't make the news, the ones that can't be explained away. This is what we do here on MindFuel. We tell you what really happened, no matter how hard it is to believe. If you want more of that, real accounts, real voices, and the kinds of truths that make you question what you thought you knew, then subscribe now, because tonight's story is only one of many. Now, back to that night. I can still feel it when I close my eyes. The weight of the forest pressing in, the beam of my flashlight cutting through mist, the sound of my own breathing louder than it should have been. Every step felt like it was being measured, every pause like it was being mirrored. And when I finally stumbled onto the place where the trail ended, I realized I wasn't standing at the edge of mystery anymore. I was standing inside it. I joined the search team because I thought I was helping families. Instead, I learned why the Mark Twain forest has its reputation and why some disappearances aren't meant to be solved. I can still hear that night in my memory. The forest should have been alive with sound. Crickets, owls, maybe the distant rush of a creek. But it wasn't. As soon as we crossed the ridge into that section of the park, the noises thinned, until there was nothing left at all. It was the kind of silence that pressed on your chest, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. The dogs picked it up before any of us did. Their ears pinned back, tails low, refusing to follow the trail markers that pointed downhill into the deeper brush. We had to tug their leashes, and even then, they resisted like they knew something we didn't. I told myself it was just nerves. That happens when you've spent hours looking for people you know you probably won't find. But the more we pushed forward, the more I realized this wasn't normal. My radio cracked once, just static, even though I knew the repeater tower wasn't far. One of the younger rangers muttered that his compass was off, the needle drifting even when he stood still. That was when it hit me. We weren't the only ones searching that night. I can't explain how I knew it. There was no clear sign, no shadow darting between the trees, but the air had weight, like a second presence was moving parallel with us, silent, patient. Every so often I caught the faint crunch of a step that didn't match ours, too heavy for a deer, too deliberate for chance. We called out the names of the missing hikers. Ethan! Melissa! The sound carried strange in that hollow quiet. It echoed back too quickly, like the trees were closer than they were. And once, I swear this on my badge, we heard a voice answer. It wasn't theirs. It came from the darkness below us, the exact same words we had just shouted, thrown back in a tone just a shade too flat. One of the volunteers thought it was an echo, but echoes don't change pitch. Echoes don't pause between syllables, and echoes don't linger like something alive. That's when I stopped shouting. I wanted to tell the others to stop too, but the words wouldn't leave my throat. I just raised my hand and signaled silence. They looked at me, confused, until there were too many vanishings, too many stories passed down through families that warn you to keep to the ridges and never set foot in the low ground after dusk. That night, I understood why, because when we finally reached the creek bed, I found signs, not of hikers struggling through brush, but of something else entirely. The kind of prints that don't match any boot or shoe. The kind that suggests something tall, heavy, and wrong had walked there before us. And the worst part? They weren't heading deeper into the forest. They were circling us. The Mark Twain National Forest. It doesn't make national headlines the way Yellowstone or Yosemite does, but if you talk to the locals, if you sit with the families who live on the edges of these woods, you'll hear it plain as day. People vanish here, more often than you'd think. The files don't all line up neatly. Some reports are buried under clerical errors. Others get written off as hikers who wandered too far and succumbed to the elements. But I've been in the ranger service long enough to see the patterns. Too many disappearances in concentrated pockets of the forest. Too many families left with no answers, no remains, no trace at all. One of those families found me directly. I was on shift at the ranger station when they walked in. A mother and father, exhausted, eyes red from nights without sleep. Their son Ethan had been hiking with a friend, Melissa. Both in their 20s, both locals who knew these trails since they were kids. They weren't the type to get lost. They weren't reckless. And yet, they were gone. The family begged me to help, not the department, not the volunteers, me. They had heard the other stories, families who never got a call back, searches that dragged on for days and then quietly stopped without closure. They told me something I'll never forget. The woods don't just take people, they keep them. I wanted to tell them that wasn't true, that I'd seen plenty of cases where we found someone alive, cold and hungry but breathing, that the forest wasn't malicious, it was just indifferent. But I couldn't bring myself to say it, because deep down, I knew better. We mounted a search within hours. Dogs, radios, volunteers combing through ridges and valleys. The first day turned up nothing, The second, we found Melissa's backpack snagged on a root, the straps torn, as if it had been yanked from her shoulders. There was no blood, no drag marks, just a bag left behind, like it didn't matter anymore. I filed it in the report, but here's what I didn't write. The ground around that site was strange. The leaves were pressed flat in a wide circle, as though something had stood there. Not a person, something bigger. Too heavy for one set of feet, but not wide enough for a group. By the third day, morale sank. That's when one of the older volunteers, even inside the service, we admit it to each other in low voices. Many bodies are never recovered. We track prints until they stop cold. We follow dogs until they lie down and refuse to go further. It's like the forest swallows them, whole and deliberate. And when you've been on enough searches, you start to feel it. You start to sense that the missing aren't just gone. They're still here, somewhere between the trees, watching, waiting, listening. That was the realization that kept me awake at night after Ethan and Melissa's case. Because I knew then, this wasn't just another missing persons file to collect dust. Something else had them, and I was going to find out what. The first official search went out at dawn. We moved as a coordinated unit, 6 rangers, a handful of volunteers, and 2 search dogs trained to track both scent and cadaver. I'd been on dozens of searches before, but something about that morning unsettled me before we even left camp. The air was heavy, colder than it should have been for midsummer. The forest felt wrong, as though we had stepped into a place that didn't want us there. The dogs picked up the trail at first, sniffing, whining, pulling against their handlers, but within an hour, they froze, hackles raised, ears pinned back. They refused to move past a bend in the creek bed, whining so hard the handlers had to drag them away. These animals had faced mountain lions, coyotes, even bears. But here, they dug their claws into the dirt and refused to go forward. Then the equipment started failing. I tapped my compass, convinced I'd dropped it too hard against a rock. But no, the needle spun in slow circles, refusing to hold steady. Others checked theirs, same problem. North, south, east, west. The directions dissolved into nonsense. Our radios weren't better. At first, just static, bursts of white noise in the ear. Then whole blocks of silence where voices should have been. We tried different channels. Nothing. Even the emergency frequency sputtered in and out like we were standing inside a dead zone. One of the rangers muttered that the hollow stretch had always been like this. I shot him a look, but he just lowered his eyes. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but the truth was there. We weren't just searching in difficult terrain. The forest itself was making sure we couldn't. Hours into the sweep, we found the first sign. Not a body, not even bones. It was Ethan's jacket, shredded, torn into long strips, hanging from a low branch. The fabric fluttered in the wind like it had been placed there on purpose. We stood around it in silence. No blood, no drag marks. Just the jacket, hanging at eye level, swaying back and forth. Another mile in, we found Melissa's water bottle, crushed, like something strong had gripped it in one hand. No teeth marks, no sign of an animal, just deliberate pressure. The dogs, exhausted from resisting their handlers, lay on the ground and refused to stand. Our radios gave one last squeal of static and went silent. That was when I realized something important. We weren't searching for missing hikers anymore. Whatever had left those pieces behind wanted us to find them. By late afternoon, the forest had swallowed us deeper than I'd ever gone on duty. The younger rangers tried to stay focused, tried to convince themselves this was just another search. But the silence in the woods was growing heavier by the hour, and I could see the unease in every face around me. That's when the older ranger, Bill Carver, pulled me aside. Bill had nearly 3 decades in the service. He'd walked these trails long before I put on the badge, and he carried the kind of weight you only get from seeing more than you should. He waited until the others had moved ahead, until it was just the two of us standing in a shallow clearing. His voice was low, almost trembling, like he didn't want the trees themselves to hear. "Thomas," he said, "you need to understand something. This, what you're seeing, it's not new." I frowned, but he kept going. "Years back, I was assigned to another case. A couple, mid-30s, experienced hikers, went missing not far from here. We found their footprints easy enough, side by side, heading into the trees. Looked normal at first, but a mile in, the trail changed." Bill paused, like he was weighing whether to tell me the rest. His eyes darted over his shoulder, scanning the shadows, then settled back on mine. There was a second set of prints. Barefoot, larger than any man I've ever seen, too wide, too long. They came out of nowhere, just appeared in the soil beside the couple's tracks. And Thomas, those prints circled them, over and over, like something was pacing them in silence. My mouth went dry. "What happened to the couple?" I asked. Bill's gaze fell to the ground. The footprints led to a dead end, just stopped. No body, no sign of struggle, nothing. Like they'd been lifted out of the world altogether. The only thing left were those prints. They led back into the woods and then vanished. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We don't hunt them. We pretend we don't see them. That's how we stay alive." I wanted to push him for answers, demand he explain what they were. But before I could, a call came from the team ahead of us. They'd found something. Bill grabbed my arm before I could move. His grip was iron. Night had crept in faster than we expected. The forest floor darkened first, shadows knotting around our boots, and then the ridges above sank into a black wall against the sky. We switched on our flashlights, thin beams that barely pierced the mist weaving through the trees. Searching at night is always dangerous, but this felt worse. Like every step carried us deeper into something we weren't meant to disturb. The team spread out in a staggered line. I kept close to Bill, his earlier warning still rattling inside my skull. My light swept across brush, tree trunks, broken stumps, but nothing moved. Nothing ever moved, and that was the problem. The forest was too still. And then I heard it. My name. Thomas. Drawn out, low, drifting from somewhere deep in the woods ahead. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. No one in our team had spoken. They were behind me, their lights bobbing faintly through the trees. The voice came from further on, too far to be any of ours. I didn't answer. I didn't even look at Bill. I just kept my light forward, scanning, waiting. But the voice came again, closer this time, curling through the silence like smoke. "Thomas." This time Bill heard it too. I saw his head snap toward me, eyes wide. But before either of us could speak, one of the volunteers pointed into the distance. "Over there!" Flashlights. Sure enough, pale beams of light flickered between the trees, weaving slowly back and forth. Relief rippled through the group. Another team, maybe? But my stomach twisted. I knew every unit in the field, every ranger assigned to the search. Nobody else should have been out here. Still, we followed. Our boots crunched through dead leaves, our beams cutting across the black. But the closer we moved, the further the lights seemed to drift, like they were leading us somewhere, one step at a time. "Wait," Bill muttered. "Stop." But the others didn't stop. Desperation drove them forward, volunteers and younger rangers alike, convinced we were about to find Ethan and Melissa. The lights blinked out all at once. We stood there in total darkness, the forest pressing against us. My ears rang with silence, every muscle tight, waiting. And then we saw them. We were left standing in silence again, all of us shaking, all of us realizing at the same time, whatever was out there, it wasn't lost. It wasn't running. It was watching. I didn't mean to separate myself from the others. It wasn't intentional. One moment I was sweeping my flashlight across the undergrowth, and the next, I heard it. A faint sound, softer than the wind, yet sharp enough to freeze me mid-step. It was crying, the kind of crying that gets inside your chest, weak, muffled, the way a child sounds when they're scared and trying to hold it back. I called out, but my voice caught before the word fully formed. Something in me already knew. There was no answer coming. Still, I moved toward it. Each step pulled me deeper into the brush, the beam of my flashlight bouncing across twisted roots and hanging vines. The forest around me seemed to shift, soundless, heavy, like the trees were leaning in closer, watching. The crying grew clearer, tugging me forward until I found myself facing what looked like a collapse of brush and bramble. Only when I crouched did I notice the opening, low to the ground, just wide enough for a person to crawl inside. It wasn't natural. The branches and rocks were arranged in a way that felt deliberate, like a door hidden from anyone who wasn't meant to find it. Against everything my instincts screamed, I got down on my hands and knees and slid my flashlight inside. The space beyond opened wider than I expected. A cavern-like chamber, the walls damp, slick with moss. My light cut across mounds of debris, but these weren't rocks or leaves. They were clothes, torn jackets, shirts stiff with old dirt, hiking boots still laced, one of them half buried in the mud. A tent collapsed against the wall, its nylon shredded like paper. I stepped fully inside. My boot crunched against something small, metal. I knelt and picked it up. A wristwatch, the band twisted, the glass cracked, but the hand still frozen at 2:17. My beam shifted again, and more came into view. Backpacks stacked in a corner, water bottles, keys, wallets emptied of everything but faded ID cards. Every item told a story of someone who had entered these woods and never returned. The sound came from the back of the chamber, from a place my flashlight hadn't reached. I turned slowly, raising the beam. For a split second, I saw movement, something low to the ground, its limbs bent wrong, its skin catching the light in a way that didn't look like flesh. The beam flickered, my radio crackled with static, and the thing shifted forward, fast, too fast. I didn't think, I just ran. My hands scraped raw as I crawled back through the opening, the forest air hitting me like a shock. Behind me, I heard the brush shift, like something enormous was pressing against it, but it didn't follow me out. When I stumbled back into the tree line, gasping, my flashlight shaking, I realized I had strayed too far from the others. The night was silent again. Silent, except for the faint sound of branches breaking in the dark. I should have walked away. I should have taken what I saw inside that cave and told myself it was enough. But when I finally made it back to camp that night, when the others pressed me for where I had gone, I didn't say a word. I couldn't, because the truth was, I wasn't afraid enough to stop. I was obsessed. The images wouldn't leave my mind. The piles of clothing, the scratched wall, the sound of that breathing in the dark. I told myself it wasn't right to leave it unexplored, that maybe there was some clue I'd missed that could explain what happened to the boy we were searching for. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about helping anymore. It was about needing to know. The next day, while the rest of the team spread out along the ridges, I slipped away, alone. No radio, no partner, just me and the path back toward that hidden opening. I didn't find it. Instead, as the sun began to sink, I found something else. The forest had a different weight to it at dusk, the shadows stretching into long fingers, the air carrying a damp chill. I stood at the edge of a clearing, scanning the tree line, when I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I wasn't alone. At first, it was only a shape between the trees, too tall to be a person, but too still to be an animal. My eyes adjusted as the last light drained from the sky, and then it stepped forward. It was tall. Its limbs were stretched long, too long, the skin drawn tight over bone like it had been pulled there by force. The way it moved, slow, deliberate, felt wrong, like it wasn't used to wearing its own body. And then I saw its face. Almost human. Almost. The proportions were off. The eyes too wide, set too far apart. And the jaw, it hung unnaturally low, like it had been broken and never healed. Its mouth gaped open, slack, as though it didn't quite understand how to close it. Then, from that open mouth, came a sound that hollowed me out. "Please, help me." It was the voice of the boy's mother. Word for word, the way she had pleaded with us just the night before. Only now, twisted, dragged through something that didn't belong to her throat. I dropped to the ground without thinking. The smell hit me then, damp earth, rot, and something coppery, like dried blood. It lingered, listening, breathing, sniffing, and then, with a slow, jerking motion, it straightened. "Please," it whispered again, the voice faltering, as though it couldn't remember the words. And then, it moved on. I stayed there long after it had disappeared back into the trees, my body locked in place, afraid that if I shifted even a finger, it would come back. By the time I staggered back to camp, the night was black, and I knew, whatever that thing was, it wasn't hunting at random. It was learning, studying, trying to be one of us. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its face, the way the jaw hung too low, the way it borrowed someone else's voice and wore it like a mask. By morning, I had convinced myself that what I saw had to connect with all the disappearances. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. I started piecing things together the way you do when the puzzle has been sitting in front of you for years and suddenly, one piece snaps into place. The search dogs that always refused certain areas. The gear we found shredded high in the trees with no blood. The families begging for closure, never getting it. The whispers from the locals. The woods don't just take people, they keep them. And the cave. Those piles of clothes, the scratched wall with figures being dragged into darkness. That thing didn't kill quickly. It took people alive. It dragged them under, down into those caves that ran beneath the forest floor. That's why so many bodies were never recovered. Not because they got lost or fell or were taken by animals. No, because they were being held somewhere. And whatever it was doing to them, none of us ever saw them again. But the part that still gnaws at me is this. I wasn't the first to figure it out. Later, when I returned to the ranger station, I dug through the old logbooks, decades worth of entries, yellowed pages that smelled of mildew and dust. Most of them were what you'd expect: patrol reports, weather notes, records of hikers treated for sprains or dehydration. But hidden between the routine were lines that chilled me. Footprints doubled back, seconds set barefoot. Voices in the dark. That thing in the woods, the one that took the boy, the one that whispered with someone else's voice. It had been here for generations, taking who it wanted, and the government had decided it was easier to let the forest keep its secrets than to face what lived in the dark. I realized then that the missing weren't just statistics. They weren't numbers on a page or faces on posters. They were trapped, kept, their voices stolen, and we were never meant to bring them back. I wish I could tell you that I left it behind, that I put those logbooks back on the shelf and never looked again. But the truth is, once you've seen it, once you've heard it, the forest doesn't let you go. Every time I returned to the Mark Twain, the silence felt heavier. The shadows leaned closer, and I began to understand what the older rangers meant when they said, "We don't hunt them. We pretend we don't see them. That's how we stay alive." This place isn't haunted. Haunted would mean the dead are restless. No, the Mark Twain forest is hunted. Something out there claims what wanders too far, drags them where no search party will ever reach. And if you walk too deep, if you ignore the warnings, you won't just vanish, you'll be claimed. And as I'm speaking these words, I can't shake the feeling that it knows, that it listens when its secrets are spoken aloud. Because some nights, when the wind shifts just right, I hear it, my name, spoken low, drawn out, in a voice that doesn't belong to anyone I know. Rustling leaves, faint movement in the brush, then a distorted whisper, close, too close. Thomas. Silence.